The Empathic Echo. By Thomas King. Chapter 3. The Prophecy Awakens. The king, Theron, returned to his council chambers, the oracle's pronouncements a chilling echo in his mind. The fractured whispers of Lysandra, the unsettling glimpse of a power beyond comprehension, had not diminished with the distance from her sanctum. Instead, they had coalesced into a gnawing disquiet that demanded action. The incident in the marketplace, the inexplicable surge of kinetic force that had saved the child, now seemed less a random anomaly and more a prelude to the chaos Lysandra had foretold. The oracle had spoken of a shadow walker, a being of profound detachment whose dormant power was stirring, a power that could unravel the very weave of magic that bound Ethelgard together. This was not a threat to be ignored. He summoned his most trusted advisors, Lord Valerius, the stoic commander of the royal guard, Alarum Meadowlight, the sharp-witted head of the royal scribes and archivists, and Master Borin, the king's most learned mage and advisor on arcane matters. The atmosphere in the chamber was heavy, thick with the unspoken anxieties that had permeated the kingdom for months. The rumors of strange occurrences, the growing unrest in the outer provinces, and now the oracle's dire warnings, were weaving a tapestry of fear that even the most resolute hearts could not ignore. "My lords, my lady," Theron began, his voice resonating with a newfound urgency. "The oracle's vision was profound and disturbing. The incident in the market was not a fluke. I believe it is connected to what Lysandra foresees." He recounted the details of his meeting with the oracle, the fear in her eyes, the fragmented visions of a power stirring, a power that existed outside the known currents of magic. He described the concept of the Shadow Walker, an individual whose existence was a paradox, a void that was not empty, a stillness that held immense, unacknowledged potential. Lord Valerius, ever vigilant, ran a hand over the hilt of his sword. "Your Majesty, if there is a threat to the realm, the guard will stand ready. But how can we combat an enemy we cannot perceive? An enemy who, by their very nature, seeks to remain unseen?" Master Borin stroked his long, silver beard, his brow furrowed in deep thought. "The oracle spoke of a power outside our known magic. This is concerning, Your Majesty. Our understanding of magic is built upon the manipulation of elemental spirits and the channeling of ambient energies. What could this primal force be, and how could it pose such a threat?" His gaze was distant, as if he were already delving into ancient tomes in his mind. It was Alarum Meadowlight who offered a path forward. "Your Majesty, if Lysandra's visions are rooted in truth, then the answers, or at least clues, may lie within the archives. There are passages, lore considered heretical, or at least forgotten, that speak of powers that predate our current understanding of magic. Forbidden knowledge, kept under lock and key for good reason." Her eyes, usually alight with intellectual curiosity, held a somber glint. "If this Shadow Walker is a manifestation of something ancient, something that exists beyond our current magical paradigms, then perhaps our oldest texts hold a key." Theron nodded, a spark of resolve igniting within him. "The Forbidden Archives?" "Yes. I had hoped we would not need to venture there, but if it is the only way to understand this threat, then so be it. Elara, gather your most trusted scribes. We will enter the vault tonight. Master Borin, Lord Valerius, your presence will be required." Under the cloak of a moonless night, the royal council, accompanied by a contingent of Valerius's most discreet guards, descended into the subterranean depths of the citadel. The air grew colder, heavier, as they moved deeper into the earth, the torchlight casting dancing shadows that seemed to writhe with a life of their own. They passed through chambers filled with the mundane records of Ethelgard's history, scrolls detailing trade agreements, lineages, military campaigns, but their path led them to a section far older, far more guarded. A colossal iron door, etched with arcane symbols that pulsed faintly with a forgotten magic, barred their way. Elara, her face pale but determined, produced a small, intricately carved obsidian key. It fit into a hidden lock within the door's ancient mechanism. With a deep groan that seemed to reverberate through the very bones of the citadel, the door swung inward, revealing a chamber that had been sealed for centuries. The air within was dry, stagnant, carrying the faint, sharp scent of dust and decay. The chamber was not large, but its walls were lined with shelves carved directly into the rock, laden with scrolls and tomes bound in materials that were alien and unsettling. Some were brittle, their edges crumbling at the slightest touch, others seemed to be preserved by an unseen force, their bindings glowing with a faint, inner light. "This is it," Elara whispered, her voice barely audible. "The Vault of Whispers. It is said to contain knowledge that even the first kings feared to disseminate." Master Boren approached the shelf, his eyes scanning the titles, or what remained of them. "The script here is archaic, predating even the common tongue as we know it. These are records of a time before the Great Binding, before the elemental concordances were established." He carefully picked up a scroll, its papyrus so ancient it was almost translucent. As he unrolled it, it threatened to disintegrate, and he had to work with utmost precision, using specialized tools provided by Elara's scribes, to preserve its integrity. "This speaks of primal energies," Boren murmured, his voice filled with a mixture of awe and trepidation. "Forces that were not spirits to be commanded, but entities that were part of the very fabric of existence. They were raw, untamed, and incredibly powerful. The ancients—" He paused, looking at Theron. "They attempted to understand and, in some cases, to harness them. But the cost was too great. Many were lost, driven mad by the sheer immensity of what they glimpsed." They moved deeper into the vault, the torchlight illuminating more of the ancient records. Elara, her keen eyes missing nothing, pointed to a section of the wall where the rock seemed different, smoother, as if it had been deliberately concealed. "There," she said, her voice sharp. "Behind that seemingly natural formation. I sense a ward, an ancient enchantment designed to hide, not to protect from entry, but to conceal from discovery." With Boren's knowledge of ancient runes and Valerius's brute strength, they managed to dislodge the section of rock. It slid away with a grating sound, revealing a hidden alcove. Within, resting on a pedestal of dark, unpolished stone, lay a single scroll. It was unlike any other in the vault. It was not brittle and crumbling, but encased in what appeared to be a sheath of solidified starlight, shimmering with an ethereal luminescence. The scroll itself, when Elara carefully removed it from its protective sheath, was made of a material that felt like spun moonlight, cool and impossibly smooth to the touch. The writing upon it was not inked, but seemed to be woven from threads of pure light, forming characters that shifted and reformed as one looked upon them. "This is extraordinary," Elara breathed, her hands trembling slightly as she traced the luminous script. "I have never encountered anything like it. The material, it defies classification. And the language, it is beyond any known script. It seems to be speaking directly to the mind, bypassing the need for translation." As Elara focused on the scroll, the chamber seemed to fill with a soft, resonant hum. Images began to flicker at the edge of their vision, not within the scroll itself, but projected onto the very air around them. They were fleeting, ethereal, like dreams half remembered upon waking, yet undeniably potent. "It's a prophecy," Elara whispered, her voice filled with wonder. "An ancient prophecy, detailing the rise of an individual. They call them the Nexus. Someone who is born with an innate connection to the primal energies, energies that existed before the elemental spirits, before the very concept of magic as we know it." The images coalesced, becoming clearer, more defined. They saw a being, not entirely human, yet embodying a profound connection to the natural world. They saw moments of great power, not wielded through spells or incantations, but through an act of will, a natural extension of their being. The scroll detailed how this nexus was destined to wield immense power over the elemental spirits, not by commanding them, but by existing in harmony with them, a conduit through which their raw essence could flow. Master Boren's eyes widened as he saw these projections. The primal energies, the oracle spoke of a power that existed outside our known currents. This nexus, it is described as existing in a state of perfect attunement with these energies. Their awakening, the prophecy states, will coincide with a great imbalance in the world. A time when the elemental spirits themselves will be thrown into disarray, threatening to consume the mortal realms. The scrolls spoke of a lineage, long thought to be extinct, of individuals who were born with this inherent connection. They were not mages, not sorcerers, but something more fundamental, more ancient. They were described as beings who could walk between worlds, whose minds could bridge the gap between the tangible and the ethereal. However, the prophecy also warned of the inherent danger. Such power, if unchecked, or if wielded by someone unprepared, could be catastrophic. The prophecy states that the Nexus's awakening is heralded by a ripple, a disturbance in the established order. Elara continued, her voice growing more serious with each word. A sign that the primal energies, long dormant, are beginning to stir. It speaks of an individual who, though seemingly ordinary, possesses this dormant potential, an individual who will eventually be thrust into a role they never sought. Theron felt a chill run down his spine. The Oracle's Shadow Walker, the child saved from the runaway cart, it fit. The detachment, the lack of memory, the inherent power that manifested almost instinctively. It was too much of a coincidence. The prophecy, does it speak of this individual's purpose? Or of how to control them? Elara shook her head. It speaks of their destiny, Your Majesty. That they are the key to restoring the balance, but also a potential catalyst for its complete destruction. The prophecy is ambivalent. It does not offer a clear path to control, only to understanding. It states that the Nexus's true power lies not in command, but in harmony. To force their power would be to break the very balance they are meant to restore. Master Borin, his gaze fixed on the luminous script, spoke again. The scroll also mentions guardians. Not guardians of the Nexus themselves, but of the primal energies. Ancient entities, tied to the very foundations of existence, who would intervene if these energies were to be misused or to fall into the wrong hands. The Oracle mentioned those who guard the Order. Perhaps these are the entities she alluded to. The weight of this revelation settled upon them. They were not dealing with a simple rogue mage or a power-hungry sorcerer. They were facing an individual who was, in essence, a living conduit for the most ancient and potent forces in existence. An individual who, through no fault of their own, was becoming a focal point for a cosmic shift. So, Theron mused, his gaze sweeping over the ancient scroll and the figures of his advisors. This Nexus, this Shadow Walker, is an anomaly that has always existed, dormant, and now is awakening. Their power is not learned but innate. And their awakening is a sign of a greater imbalance that threatens the entire realm. Precisely, Your Majesty, Elara confirmed. The prophecy describes this individual as a linchpin. Their emergence is a sign that the primordial forces are seeking to reassert themselves, to correct an imbalance that has grown too great. But the path they take, whether it leads to restoration or destruction, is yet unwritten. Theron looked back at the ancient scroll, its luminous script seeming to pulse with an inner light. The Oracle's warnings, the market incident, and now this ancient prophecy, all converged into a single, terrifying truth. Ethelgard was on the cusp of a profound change, a change that would be driven by an individual who was unaware of their own immense power, an individual who was more a force of nature than a person. The task before them was no longer one of conquest or defense, but of understanding, of guidance, and of a desperate hope that the Nexus would choose the path of balance, not chaos. The secrets of the Vault of Whispers had revealed a truth far more complex and perilous than they had ever imagined, setting the stage for a destiny that would test the very foundations of their world. The luminous script of the Nexus scroll seemed to writhe, not with malice, but with the restless energy of nascent power. Elara, her fingers tracing the unearthly characters, felt a tremor pass through the chamber, an almost imperceptible shift in the very air. The prophecy speaks of a child of no past, she murmured, her voice hushed with a reverence that bordered on fear. Born into a silence that precedes memory, touched by a power that flows not through the veins of our world, but through the conduits of nascent creation. Master Borin leaned closer, his silver beard brushing against the ancient parchment. A child of no past. It suggests an origin unknown, a life devoid of lineage or history. The fragmented memories and experiences, his inability to recall his life before the market, it aligns with this chilling description. And the power, beyond the ebb and flow of mortal time, it speaks of a primal force, untouched by the cycles of life and death, by the very progression of ages. His gaze, usually sharp and analytical, was clouded with a profound unease. He had spent his life studying the intricate dance of magic, the predictable currents and flows that govern their world. But this was something utterly alien, a force that defied all established principles. Lord Valerius, his hand resting on the pommel of his sword, his gaze fixed on the shifting script, grunted his skepticism, though an undercurrent of unease underscored his tone. A child? We speak of a threat that could unravel Ethelgard, and the oracle's visions in this ancient scribble point to a child? It seems improbable. Unless this child is merely a vessel, a pawn in a larger game. He thought of the markets, the flash of uncontrolled energy, the sheer, brute force that had erupted from the seemingly ordinary boy. If that was the power of a child of no past, then their world was indeed in peril. He could not fathom how such a being could be anything but a harbinger of destruction. King Theron, his brow furrowed in deep contemplation, considered the words. "A child of no past," he repeated, the phrase resonating with a disquieting familiarity. He pictured Zan, the boy he had seen in the marketplace, his eyes wide with a mixture of confusion and an unfathomable, raw power. There was a void in that boy's existence, a palpable absence of history that had always struck him as peculiar. Lysandra's visions had been fragmented, yet they had all pointed towards this growing unease, this nascent power stirring within the realm. Now this prophecy, so ancient and yet so disturbingly relevant, seemed to confirm his deepest fears. The Nexus, the Shadow Walker, the child of no past, were they all one and the same? The prophecy does not offer clarity on the Nexus's role, Elara continued, her voice taking on a more somber tone. It describes the power, its source, and its potential. But it is ambiguous. It speaks of both salvation and annihilation. When the silent stars weep and the ancient mountains bleed, the Nexus shall rise, a dawn or a sundering. It is a riddle, Your Majesty, one that promises either an unprecedented era of balance, or an abyss from which our world may never recover. Master Borin stroked his beard, his mind racing through countless forgotten lore. The ancients who penned this scroll understood the duality of raw power. They recognized that forces of such magnitude, untamed and unguided, could be as destructive as they were potentially beneficial. The primal energies are not inherently good or evil, they simply are. Their manifestation, their impact, depends entirely on the wielder and on the context of their awakening. He looked at Theron, his gaze piercing. If this child of no past is indeed the Nexus, then the greatest burden falls not upon them, but upon us. To guide, to understand, to ensure that this awakening serves Ethelgard, rather than its undoing. The weight of that responsibility settled upon the king like a physical mantle. He had been born into a world of established order, of predictable magic and well-defined laws. Now, he stood on the precipice of something that defied all he knew, a force that was both ancient and utterly new. The oracle's pronouncements, the unsettling incident in the marketplace, and now this ancient prophecy, all converged into a singular, terrifying realization. Ethelgard was poised for a transformation, driven by a power that was as unpredictable as it was immense. A dawn or a sundering? Theron echoed, his voice barely a whisper. He thought of the burgeoning unrest in the outer provinces, the subtle tremors of discord that had been growing for months. Was this the prelude to the sundering? Or was the emergence of the Nexus a sign that the balance was already so profoundly broken that only such a cataclysmic force could hope to mend it? The thought offered little comfort. The prophecy was a double-edged sword, a testament to the volatile nature of the forces at play. The prophecy also speaks of the Mender's touch, Elara interjected, her eyes scanning a particularly dense section of the scroll. It is described as a gentleness that can soothe the raging storms of primal energy, a wisdom that can channel raw power into constructive purpose. It is not a spell, nor an incantation, but an innate quality. A resonance that can calm the tempest within the Nexus. Master Borin's eyes lit up with a glimmer of hope. The Mender's touch. This suggests that the Nexus is not solely a destructive force. It implies an inherent capacity for control, for balance. Perhaps this Mender's touch is not a separate entity, but a facet of the Nexus themselves, a dormant aspect waiting to be awakened. He paused, a thoughtful frown creasing his brow. Or it could refer to an external influence, a guide. Someone or something that possesses the ability to unlock this latent potential, to steer the Nexus towards their role as a mender, rather than a destroyer. Lord Valerius remained unconvinced. A child with a gentle touch against a power that can unravel the weave of magic? It still sounds like a gamble, A perilous one. He preferred concrete defenses, tangible enemies, armies that could be met with steel. This was an enigma, a force that operated beyond the realm of conventional warfare. But what if this mender's touch is not an ability to be taught, but a state of being? Theron mused, his gaze drifting towards the hidden alcove where the scroll had been found. What if it is about understanding, not control? Lysandra spoke of a power beyond comprehension, something that could not be commanded, only understood. Perhaps the prophecy is not about finding someone to control the Nexus, but about finding someone who can be with the Nexus, someone who can resonate with their power and guide them towards balance. Elara nodded slowly. The scroll hints at this. It states that the Nexus's strength lies not in dominion, but in symbiosis. To attempt to subjugate this power would be to break it, to shatter the very balance it is destined to restore. The prophecy emphasizes harmony, not subjugation. The mender's touch, then, might be the key to achieving that harmony. The implications were staggering. They were not seeking a weapon, but a companion. Not a tool to be wielded, but a life to be nurtured. The burden of the child of no past was not just the immense power they held, but the crushing weight of destiny placed upon their innocent shoulders. And that burden, King Theron realized with a growing sense of dread, was now their burden too. They had to find this child, not to imprison or control them, but to understand them, to foster the mender's touch, and to pray that they would choose the path of dawn, not sundering. Master Boren ran a trembling hand over the luminous script. The prophecy speaks of the veil thinning. It is mentioned as a precursor to the Nexus's full awakening. A time when the boundaries between the physical realm and the spirit world become blurred, when creatures of myth and legend might walk among us once more. This thinning of the veil is often accompanied by unusual phenomena, by shifts in the natural order. He looked up, his eyes wide with concern. The strange occurrences in the outer provinces, the unseasonal storms, the whispers of unusual creatures sighted near the Whispering Woods, these could all be signs of the veil thinning. So, the child is not only a conduit for primal power, but also a catalyst for a weakening of the barriers between worlds? Valerius asked, his voice laced with skepticism, yet a new edge of apprehension. He had heard the whispers, seen the fear in the eyes of his scouts returning from the borderlands. Tales of shadows that moved with unnatural speed, of beasts with eyes that burned like embers. It would appear so, Elara confirmed, her voice somber. The prophecy states that the Nexus's emergence is intertwined with a fundamental reordering of reality. Their awakening draws upon the raw energies of creation, and in doing so, it can disrupt the established order, including the ethereal barriers that separate realms. She pointed to another passage, the luminous ink glowing with an almost pulsating intensity. When the Nexus draws breath, the unseen shall stir, and the forgotten shall find form. King Theron felt a cold dread seep into his bones. He had envisioned a threat that was contained, perhaps a rogue mage or a powerful warlord. But this was something far grander, far more terrifying. A force that could reshape the very fabric of their existence, that could unleash horrors from realms unknown. The responsibility to find this child, to understand them, and to guide them towards the mender's touch, now seemed an almost insurmountable task. The prophecy is remarkably detailed, yet frustratingly vague. Boren lamented, his scholarly mind struggling to reconcile the ancient wisdom with the pressing reality. It provides a roadmap, but it does not reveal the destination. We know the child of no past is awakening, that their power is tied to primal energies, and that their emergence is causing the veil to thin. But we do not know who they are, where they are, or how to ensure they become a mender, not a destroyer. There is a mention of a sigil, Elara said, her finger tracing a complex, star-like pattern etched into the scroll. A mark that would appear upon the Nexus. The prophecy calls it a beacon in the void, a symbol that would denote their unique connection to the primal forces. It is described as being both innate, and yet something that would manifest when their power begins to stir. Valerius's eyes narrowed. A mark? If this child is to be found, surely such a distinctive mark would be a key. It is a possibility, Theron conceded, the idea offering a sliver of hope in the encroaching darkness. But we must be cautious. The prophecy also warns of false beacons, of shadows masquerading as light. This sigil, if it exists, must be recognized with absolute certainty. The prophecy emphasizes patience," Elara added, her gaze steady. "It states that the truth of the Nexus is revealed not by haste, but by understanding. To rush in, to demand answers, would be to alienate the very individual we seek to guide. The Nexus, by their very nature, is likely to be as fearful and confused as we are by their burgeoning power." Theron nodded, the wisdom of her words resonating deeply. They were not hunters, but potential guardians. Their approach must be one of empathy, of careful observation, and of a profound respect for the unknown forces at play. The burden of the Chosen One was immense, but the burden of guiding that Chosen One, of shaping destiny itself, fell upon their shoulders. The fate of Ethelgard, he knew, hinged on their ability to unravel the riddle of the Nexus, and to nurture the spark of a mender within a soul touched by the raw, untamed power of creation itself. The weight of this prophecy was a heavy one, a shadow that stretched across the future of their kingdom, and Theron felt its chill deep within his heart. He looked at his advisors, their faces etched with the same mixture of fear and resolve, and knew they would face this daunting challenge together, for Ethelgard, and for the hope of a dawn, rather than a sundering. The weight of the prophecy, so recently unveiled, still hung heavy in the air of the royal chamber. Yet, Elara's duty, a familiar and grounding force, called her away from the scroll and its cryptic pronouncements. The incident in the market, the raw, uncontrolled surge of power that had emanated from the orphan boy, Zan, was too significant to be ignored. Master Boren's theories about temporal anomalies, and the unnerving resonance of Zan's presence with the Nexus prophecy, demanded a more direct investigation. Elara, a scholar at heart but a pragmatist in action, understood that ancient texts, however illuminating, could only offer so much. The truth, or at least the next piece of it, lay in the boy himself. She moved with a quiet determination, the silk of her robes rustling softly against the stone floor as she exited the council room. Lord Valerius's dismissive skepticism, King Theron's grave contemplation, and Master Boren's excited, yet fearful, analysis of the Nexus scroll echoed in her mind. But it was the image of Zan, his wide, bewildered eyes in the chaotic marketplace, that truly spurred her. There was an emptiness in him, a void that had troubled her even before the prophecy had given it a name, a child of no past. Her investigation began not with overt questioning, but with careful observation. Elara had a natural gift for subtlety, a talent honed by years of deciphering obscure texts and observing the nuanced interactions of courtly life. She knew that approaching the boy directly, with the weight of the king's concern and the alarming implications of the prophecy, would likely only serve to frighten him, or worse, trigger another uncontrolled surge of power. Instead, she opted for a more circuitous route, a method of inquiry that allowed her to gather information without revealing her hand. She visited the orphanage where Zan had been placed after his indiscretion in the market. It was a stark, utilitarian building, bustling with the cacophony of children, yet Zan seemed to exist within its walls as if cloaked in a shroud of his own making. Elara, posing as a traveling scholar seeking local knowledge, spoke with the matron, a stout, kind-faced woman named Agnes. Agnes, though well-meaning, offered little beyond the superficial. Zan was a quiet child, she explained, good-natured but withdrawn. He rarely played with the others, preferring to spend his time alone, sketching in the dirt with a stick or staring out of the grimy windows. "He's a peculiar one, bless his heart," Agnes had said, wiping her hands on her apron. "Doesn't seem to remember much, poor lamb. Came to us with nothing but the clothes on his back. Not a peep about where he came from, or who his people were. Just appeared like a stray dog." Agnes's words, spoken with a motherly pity, struck a resonant chord with Elara. A child of no past. The prophecy was not just metaphorical, it was literal. Elara spent the next few days observing Zan from a discreet distance. She would linger in the vicinity of the orphanage, or pass by the less frequented corners of the city where he sometimes wandered. She noted his solitary habits, his almost compulsive avoidance of close interaction. He didn't fight with other children, nor did he seek their company. He existed in a self-imposed isolation, a small island in the bustling sea of the city. There was a stillness about him, an unnatural calm that belied the boisterous energy of the other orphans. He never seemed to laugh, nor cry, nor express any overt emotion. It was as if he were a spectator to his own life, observing the world with a detached curiosity. This emotional reserve was particularly striking. Elara, attuned to the subtle currents of emotion that flowed through all living beings, found Zan's emotional landscape to be strangely muted. It was as if a vital aspect of his being was absent, or deliberately suppressed. He did not flinch from harsh words, nor did he beam at kindness. He simply was. This lack of outward emotional response was more unnerving than any outburst of anger or fear could have been. It suggested a profound disconnect, an internal barrier that prevented him from fully engaging with the world around him. As she observed him, Elara noticed something else. Periodically, a faint, almost inaudible hoot would emanate from the shadows, or from a nearby rooftop. It was her owl spirit, a creature of keen senses and a deep connection to the arcane. The owl, a silent sentinel, was more than just a companion. It was a living divining rod, attuned to the subtle energies that permeated the world. And it was, Elara realized, reacting to Zan. The owl would emit these soft calls whenever Zan was near, its spectral form often flitting through the periphery of Elara's vision, its unseen gaze fixed on the boy. It was not a sound of alarm, nor of aggression, but of a strange, almost tentative curiosity. Elara had trained her owl spirit to sense and report on unusual magical signatures, particularly those that deviated from the known currents of Ethelgard's magic. The owl's hooting, in this context, was a confirmation that Zan was indeed a focal point of something extraordinary. Elara would then consult her own mental archives, cross-referencing the owl's unusual reactions with the fragmented lore she had absorbed over the years. There were whispers in forgotten texts, obscure passages in ancient grimoires, that spoke of beings who existed outside the normal flow of time, of entities whose very presence could cause subtle distortions in the fabric of reality. These were the legends of temporal anomalies, of echoes from other eras, of beings whose origins were so far removed from Ethelgard's present that they left faint ripples in the present. The owl's hooting, faint as it was, carried a distinct resonance, a subtle hum that Elara could only describe as out of sync. It was a vibration that felt ancient, yet nascent, a paradox that mirrored the Nexus prophecy itself. It was a signature that hinted at a power not rooted in Ethelgard's present, but perhaps drawn from a source outside its temporal boundaries. The owl's sensitivity to this out-of-sync energy was a direct link to the ancient texts that spoke of temporal anomalies, texts that had previously seemed like mere theoretical curiosities, but which now pulsed with a terrifying relevance. One afternoon, while observing Zan near the city's sprawling marketplace, the very place where his power had first manifested, Elara saw a flicker, a momentary distortion in the air around him. It was so brief, so subtle, that it would have been invisible to the untrained eye. Yet, Elara's focus was absolute. The air seemed to shimmer, like heat rising from a summer road, but without any discernible source of heat. It was a visual echo of the out-of-sync resonance her owl spirit had been signaling. Her owl, perched on a nearby gargoyle, let out a soft, drawn-out hoot, its head swiveling in Zan's direction. The sound was almost a lament, a soft query directed at the anomaly. Elara felt a tremor run through her, a sympathetic vibration to the disturbance she had witnessed. The ancient texts described such distortions as the scarring left by temporal displacement, faint tears in the fabric of reality caused by beings who did not belong to a particular point in time. She discreetly moved closer, her movements fluid and unhurried. Zan was sitting alone on a weathered stone bench, his gaze fixed on a group of children playing a boisterous game of tag. He watched them with an unreadable expression, his small hands clasped tightly in his lap. There was no envy in his eyes, no longing for inclusion, only a quiet, passive observation. It was as if he were studying them, trying to understand their motivations, their emotional responses, as an anthropologist might study an alien species. Elara remembered Master Borin's words about the child of no past potentially being a conduit for primal forces, forces that existed beyond the normal cycles of life and death, beyond the varied progression of ages. The subtle temporal distortions she was witnessing, the owl's unusual resonance with Zan's presence, all pointed towards this terrifying possibility. This wasn't just a matter of a child with unusual abilities. It was a matter of a being whose very existence was a temporal anomaly, a living paradox. She decided to take a small risk. Pulling a simple, unadorned wooden bird from a pouch at her belt, a common child's toy, she approached Zan. Her intention was not to initiate a conversation, but to offer a simple, innocuous gesture. She knelt a few feet away from him, placing the bird gently on the ground between them. Zan's head slowly turned towards her, his eyes, a startlingly clear shade of gray, meeting hers. There was no fear in them, no suspicion, only that same placid, detached curiosity. He looked at the wooden bird, then back at Alara, his expression unchanging. It was as if he were analyzing the object, its material, its form, its purpose, without any emotional connection. Alara waited, her breath held. She had expected, perhaps, a flicker of interest, a slight shift in his posture, anything to indicate a response. But there was nothing. Zen simply continued to stare, his gaze unnervingly steady. The only indication of his awareness of her presence was the subtle, almost imperceptible hum of energy that Alara could now sense emanating from him, a hum that the owl spirit had been signaling. It was faint, like a distant echo, but undeniably there. Then, as if triggered by some unseen cue, the air around Zen shimmered again, more noticeably this time. A small pebble near his foot seemed to vibrate, then momentarily disappear, only to reappear a fraction of an inch to the left. It was a fleeting, almost blink-and-you'll-miss-it event, but Alara saw it. The owl on the gargoyle let out another soft hoot, a sound that seemed to carry a note of melancholy. Zan's gaze remained fixed on the pebble, his expression still unreadable. He made no move to pick it up, nor did he react to its brief disappearance. It was as if such temporal flux was a mundane occurrence, something he had witnessed before, or perhaps something he instinctively understood. This passive acceptance was more chilling than any outward display of fear or confusion. It suggested a fundamental difference in his perception of reality, a disconnect from the consistent, linear flow of time that governed everyone else. Alara knew, with a growing certainty, that this boy was intrinsically linked to the Nexus. The prophecy's description of a child of no past, touched by a power beyond the ebb and flow of mortal time, was not an abstract metaphor. It was a description of Zan. The temporal distortions, however subtle, were the telltale signs of a being who was not fully anchored in the present, whose origins were elsewhere, or perhaps elsewhen. She stood up slowly, retrieving the wooden bird without a word. Zan's gaze followed her movement, but still, no emotion flickered across his face. As she walked away, Alara felt the weight of her task pressing down on her. She was no longer just a scholar deciphering ancient riddles. She was an investigator, tasked with understanding a phenomenon that defied all known laws of magic and reality. And the subject of her investigation was a child who seemed to exist on the fringes of time itself, a child who was, quite possibly, the harbinger of Ethelgard's greatest trial, or its salvation. The owl spirit's soft hoots followed her, a constant, gentle reminder of the unseen energies at play. Alara knew that her investigation had only just begun. She needed to learn more about Zan's past, or rather, his lack of one. She needed to understand the nature of these temporal distortions, and how they related to the prophecy's warnings of a thinning veil. The path ahead was shrouded in uncertainty, but Alara was resolute. For the sake of Ethelgard, and for the hope of a dawn, she would delve deeper into the mystery of the child who seemed to carry the weight of forgotten ages within his silent soul. Her discreet observations had confirmed the anomaly. Now, the true work of unraveling its implications would commence, a journey that would undoubtedly lead her further into the heart of the Nexus prophecy, and its enigmatic connection to the boy known only as Zan. The subtle signs were undeniable. The orphanage matron's words, Zan's unnerving detachment, the temporal ripples detected by her owl spirit, all wove a tapestry of intrigue around the solitary orphan, confirming that the ancient prophecy had indeed awakened, and its focal point was closer than anyone had dared to imagine. The air on the outskirts of Ethelgard was thick with the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves, a far cry from the perfumed sophistication of the royal city. Zan, as usual, moved through it like a phantom, his bare feet silent on the overgrown path. He wasn't searching for anything in particular, not in the way most people searched. For Zan, it was more an act of existing, of letting his feet guide him through the forgotten spaces, the edges of the world where the city's clamor faded into the whispers of nature. He often found himself drawn to these liminal zones, places that felt as unmoored from time as he did. He skirted the crumbling remnants of what might have once been a watchtower, its stones long since surrendered to the embrace of ivy and moss. The birds, however, paid it no mind, their calls weaving a tapestry of sound through the dense canopy. Zan paused, his gray eyes so often filled with a detached curiosity, now reflecting a flicker of something akin to peace. He wasn't lonely, not in the way others understood it. His solitude was a chosen cloak, a comfortable silence that allowed him to observe, to simply be, without the messy complexities of interaction. His wandering led him through a dense thicket of gnarled hawthorn, their branches laced with thorny fingers. Beyond it, the terrain opened into a small, overgrown clearing. At its center stood a structure that even the relentless march of nature had not entirely erased. It was a shrine, or what remained of one. Crumbling walls of ancient stone, blackened by age and perhaps by fire, formed a rough, circular enclosure. A broken altar, its surface worn smooth by centuries of weather, lay at its heart. Wildflowers, defiant in their beauty, pushed their way through the cracked flagstones, their vibrant colors a stark contrast to the somber ruins. A strange stillness permeated the clearing, a silence deeper than the usual quiet of the outskirts. It was a pocket of stillness, as if the very air held its breath. Zan felt it immediately, a subtle hum that resonated not in his ears, but within his bones, a familiar sensation that had become inextricably linked to his presence. It was the same out-of-sync resonance his owl spirit had signaled, amplified here, concentrated. He stepped closer, drawn by an invisible current, his small frame moving with an almost ritualistic grace. The interior of the shrine was dimly lit, the encroaching trees filtering the sunlight into dappled patterns on the floor. The air was cool and carried the faint, earthy scent of undisturbed dust. As his eyes adjusted to the gloom, Zan's gaze fell upon the far wall. It was here that the shrine's true purpose, or at least a remnant of it, remained. A mural, etched into the stone, had survived the ravages of time, though it was heavily fragmented. The colors, once perhaps vivid, were now muted, faded hues of ochre, vermilion, and deep indigo, clinging stubbornly to the rock. He approached the mural, his fingers tracing the rough surface of the stone. The figures depicted were unlike anything he had seen in Ethelgard's tapestry of history. They were fluid, dynamic, their forms suggesting immense power. One panel showed beings that seemed to be communing with elemental spirits, swirling masses of fire, dancing water, and wisps of air. Their gestures were commanding, their postures imbued with an authority that transcended mere mortals. They were not depicted as worshipping these forces, but as directing them, as if the very essence of the elements were their playthings. Further along, the mural depicted figures manipulating what appeared to be the fabric of existence itself. There were representations of flowing rivers that seemed to curve back on themselves, of suns that rose in the west, of figures that appeared to be in multiple places at once, their forms blurred like long exposures in a magical chronometer. It was a depiction of time unbound, of cause and effect bent to will. The stylized lines, the deliberate distortions, spoke of a mastery over Chronos that Alara had only read about in the most esoteric of texts. As Zan's fingers brushed over a particular section of the mural, a depiction of a swirling vortex of light and shadow, a jolt coursed through him. It was not a physical shock, but an internal one, a sudden, overwhelming surge of power that erupted from within him, seemingly in response to the ancient imagery. It was as if the shrine, dormant for centuries, had recognized a kindred spirit in the boy who existed outside the normal flow of time. The world around him dissolved into a maelstrom of light and sensation. He felt himself falling, not through space, but through something far more profound, through the layers of his own existence, through the echoes of his being. For a fleeting, breathtaking moment, images flooded his consciousness, fragments of a past he had never known, yet which now felt undeniably his. He saw himself, smaller, younger, bathed in the ethereal glow of an alien sky. Beside him stood figures, tall and radiant, their faces obscured by the sheer intensity of their presence, yet their voices, a symphony of harmonic resonance, filled the void. They spoke of stars, of cosmic currents, of destinies intertwined with the very fabric of reality. He felt a profound sense of belonging, a connection so deep it ached in his soul. This was not the silence of isolation, this was the comfort of kinship. Then, the scene shifted violently. The radiant sky fractured, torn asunder by a cataclysm of unimaginable scale. Fire rained down from above, not the controlled flames of the mural, but a raging inferno that consumed worlds. The ground buckled, the very air screaming in agony. He saw the faces of the radiant figures contorted in pain, their harmonic voices choked by despair. A desperate struggle ensued, a battle against an unseen, overwhelming force. He felt their desperate energy converge, a final, unified surge directed not outwards, but inwards towards him. He witnessed a profound act of self-preservation, a primal instinct to survive that transcended even the cosmic catastrophe. It was a sacrifice, a desperate gamble, a pouring of essence into a vessel that could endure the unimaginable transition. He felt himself being pushed, compressed, shed of his former existence, a painful unmaking to ensure a new beginning. There was a wrenching sensation, a tearing of his very soul, as he was propelled through an infinite, swirling abyss. And then, the profound, crushing weight of loss. The radiant presences vanished, leaving behind an echoing silence that was more terrifying than any explosion. He felt utterly, irrevocably alone, adrift in a boundless void. The memory of warmth, of connection, of belonging, became a sharp, agonizing contrast to the chilling emptiness that now defined his existence. He remembered reaching out, a desperate, instinctual grasp for something, anything, to anchor him in the unfathomable darkness, but finding only the cold, indifferent expanse. The visions, intense and overwhelming, receded as abruptly as they had arrived. Zen stumbled back, gasping for breath, his small body trembling. He was back in the quiet clearing, the sunlight filtering through the trees as before, the wildflowers swaying gently. But everything had changed. The world, though physically the same, now held a different resonance. The silence was no longer merely the absence of sound, it was the echo of a vast, unfillable void. He looked at his hands, small and grubby from his wanderings. They were the hands of a child, yet within them, he now felt the echoes of immeasurable power, the phantom sensations of manipulating cosmic forces. The visions, though painful, had been revelatory. They were not mere fantasies or dreams. They were echoes of his true origin, fragments of a past that had been deliberately, violently sundered. The mural, which he had only moments ago seen as ancient and mysterious, now felt like a fragmented testament to his own lost heritage. The figures manipulating elemental spirits, the bending of time, these were not abstract concepts. They were skills, perhaps even innate abilities, that lay dormant within him, waiting to be reawakened. The catastrophic event, the desperate act of self-preservation, the profound sense of loss, these were not just abstract events, they were the defining moments of his very existence. He was not a child who had simply appeared, as Agnes had so innocently described. He was a survivor, a refugee from a lost epoch, a being whose very nature was a temporal anomaly. He touched the mural again, his fingers brushing over the fragmented images with a newfound understanding. He could feel the residual energy clinging to the stone, a faint echo of the power that had surged through him. It was a bittersweet connection, a reminder of what he had lost, but also a confirmation of what he was. The prophecy, the words whispered by Master Borin, the subtle distortions that Alara had observed, they all coalesced into a terrifying, yet exhilarating, truth. He was the child of no past, not because he lacked one, but because his past was so far removed, so profoundly alien, that it was beyond the comprehension of this world. A profound sense of destiny, not one he had sought but one that had found him, settled upon his young shoulders. He understood now why he felt so different, why the world often seemed like a stage where he was merely an observer. He was not merely disconnected from this time, he was a relic of another, a temporal echo struggling to find its place in a present that was not its own. The loss he felt was not just the loss of his past, but the loss of a connection to a reality that was now impossibly distant. He looked up at the sky, the familiar blue of Ethelgard's firmament suddenly seeming thin, a fragile veil separating him from the cosmic expanse he had glimpsed. The mundane world around him, the trees, the stones, the wildflowers, all felt ephemeral, transient. His own existence, however, felt rooted in something far more ancient, far more enduring. A single, silent tear traced a path through the grime on his cheek, a physical manifestation of the profound sorrow that had been stirred within him. It was a tear not of immediate pain, but of a deep, existential grief for a lost home, a lost family, a lost era. He didn't cry out, didn't sob. The emotions were too vast, too deeply ingrained, to be expressed in such simple ways. The tears were simply a release, a small leak in the dam of his self-imposed emotional reserve. As the surge of power subsided, leaving him feeling drained yet strangely invigorated, Zan turned away from the mural. The shrine, once a place of forgotten reverence, had become a crucible, forging a deeper understanding of his own nature. He knew, with a certainty that settled deep within his core, that his journey was far from over. The visions had confirmed his unique, anomalous existence, and in doing so, had set him on a path that would inevitably lead him towards the heart of the Nexus prophecy, towards whatever fate awaited the child who carried the echoes of forgotten ages. The silence of the outskirts, once a comfort, now seemed to hum with the vastness of his true origin, a silent testament to a destiny written in the stars and etched in the very fabric of time. He left the clearing, the crumbling stones and faded mural receding behind him, but the images, the sensations, the profound sense of loss and belonging, were now etched into his being, a permanent part of the child who had no past, and yet, a past that spanned epochs. The prophecy had not just awakened, it had spoken directly to its focal point, revealing the terrifying scope of its implications. The weight of the crown pressed down upon King Theron's brow, a familiar ache that had become as constant as the ache in his heart. He stood in his private study, the thick tapestries depicting glorious battles of Ethelgard's past doing little to distract him from the present, and more importantly, the future, that now loomed over his kingdom. The scroll lay open on his polished oak desk, its ancient vellum cool beneath his hesitant touch. The words, etched in a script that spoke of ages long past, had been deciphered by his most learned scholars, but their meaning, their dire implication, echoed in the silence of the room with a chilling clarity. The child born under the twin moons, marked by the silent star. The prophecy began, a cryptic beginning that now felt terrifyingly specific. Theron ran a hand through his thinning hair, his gaze sweeping over the intricate carvings on the desk, seeking solace in their familiar forms but finding none. He was a king of action, a man who led his armies from the front lines, whose decisions were forged in the heat of battle and tempered by the needs of his people. But this was a different kind of war. One fought not with steel and strategy, but with whispers and foresight. He understood the inherent danger. Power, especially the kind hinted at in the prophecy, was a double-edged sword. In the hands of a benevolent ruler, it could usher in an era of unparalleled prosperity and peace. But in the grip of ambition or malice, it could become a tool of unimaginable destruction, capable of shattering the fragile peace that had taken generations to build. The thought sent a shiver down his spine, a cold dread that seeped into the very marrow of his bones. He envisioned armies marching under a banner of dark magic, cities reduced to dust, and Ethelgard, his beloved kingdom, brought to its knees. His mind replayed the hushed consultations with his inner council. Master Borin, the aged lore master, his eyes clouded with a mixture of awe and apprehension, had spoken of the prophecy's historical significance, of similar omens that had preceded periods of great upheaval. Elara, his chief adviser, her usual calm demeanor replaced by a focused intensity, had meticulously outlined potential interpretations, her sharp intellect dissecting each phrase, each metaphor, searching for concrete meaning. Even Gregor, his most trusted general, a man who scoffed at superstition, had listened with a grim silence, his hand resting on the hilt of his sword, a silent promise of protection for the realm. But understanding was one thing, action was another. Theron could not simply wait for this prophesied child to reveal themselves, for the stars to align in some predetermined, possibly catastrophic fashion. He had a duty to his people, a solemn oath to protect Ethelgard from any threat, whether it came from external invaders or internal forces. He needed to know. He needed to ascertain the true nature of this individual, to understand the potential they represented, before it was too late. He let out a heavy sigh, the sound swallowed by the plushness of the room. The prophecy spoke of a child, a mere infant, and the thought of acting against one so young was deeply unsettling. Yet the stakes were too high to be swayed by sentiment. He had seen enough of the world to know that innocence could be a fragile shield, easily pierced by the sharp edges of power. This cannot be allowed to fester in uncertainty, he murmured to himself, his voice a low rumble. He straightened his shoulders, a flicker of resolve igniting in his weary eyes. He would not be paralyzed by fear or indecision. He would act, but he would act with caution, with wisdom, and with the utmost discretion. He summoned his most loyal and capable individuals. Elara, his sharp-witted adviser, was the first to arrive, her steps silent and purposeful. She entered the study with her usual air of quiet competence, her gaze meeting his with an unspoken understanding. She had been privy to the prophecy's translation, and the weight of its implications was evident in the slight furrow of her brow. "Your Majesty," she acknowledged, offering a slight bow. "Elara," Theron began, his voice steady despite the turmoil within him. "The prophecy. It weighs heavily upon us all." Elara nodded, her expression grave. "Indeed, Your Majesty. Its implications are far-reaching, and the potential for chaos is considerable." "Precisely," Theron agreed, pacing slowly towards the large window that overlooked the sprawling city of Ethelgard. The lights of the city twinkled below, a testament to the peace and prosperity he fought to preserve. "We cannot afford to be reactive. We must be proactive, but with the utmost care. The last thing we need is to sow fear and suspicion amongst our people based on mere conjecture." He turned back to Elara, his eyes locking with hers. "I have been contemplating our next steps. We cannot simply wait for the stars to align and for this child to announce their destiny. That would be foolish, and potentially disastrous." "What course of action do you propose, Your Majesty?" Elara asked, her tone calm and measured, a beacon of composure in the face of their shared concern. "We must seek them out," Theron stated, his voice firm. "Discreetly, of course. We need to identify any individuals who exhibit unusual traits, any signs of burgeoning abilities that might align with the prophecy's descriptions. But this must be done with the utmost caution. We are not to act rashly, nor are we to cause undue alarm. The goal is to observe, to gather information, and to ascertain the true nature of this prophesied figure before any decisive action is taken." He gestured towards a chair. "I want you to lead this endeavor, Elara. You have an eye for detail, a mind that can discern the truth from deception. You understand the nuances of our kingdom, the whispers of its people. I trust your judgment implicitly." Elara inclined her head. "It would be my honor, Your Majesty. I will assemble a small, trusted team. We will move through the kingdom with subtlety, our inquiries veiled, our observations discreet. We will focus on areas where such anomalies might be more likely to manifest, perhaps in remote villages, or within families known for their unique lineage, though without arousing suspicion." "Good," Theron said, a flicker of relief easing some of the tension in his shoulders. "And you will need protection. Gregor has assembled a unit of his most capable and discreet guards. They will operate under your command, their loyalty absolute, their silence guaranteed. They are to assist you in any way necessary, but their primary role is to ensure your safety and the secrecy of your mission. They are not to interfere unless absolutely necessary, and never without your explicit instruction." Gregor himself entered the study then, a towering figure of martial prowess, his presence filling the room with an aura of quiet strength. He offered a curt nod to Elara, his gaze fixed on the king. "Your Majesty," Gregor rumbled, his voice like the grinding of stones. "You summoned me." "Gregor," Theron acknowledged, his tone welcoming yet serious. "I have tasked Elara with a sensitive mission. It concerns the prophecy. She will require a hand-picked unit of your men to ensure her security and the discretion of her endeavors. They are to be your finest, men who understand the meaning of silence and loyalty. They report to Elara, but their ultimate allegiance is to the crown and to the safety of Ethelgard. Their orders are simple: protect Elara, ensure her mission remains unseen, and act only when she deems it absolutely necessary. You understand?" Gregor's eyes, sharp and assessing, met Theron's. There was no need for further explanation. He knew the king's mind, the burden he carried. "I understand, Your Majesty. My men are ready. They will be as shadows, unseen, unheard, until Elara calls upon them." He offered a firm nod. "Their loyalty is beyond question." "Excellent." Theron said, the word carrying the weight of his trust. Elara, you will work closely with Gregor. His men will be your eyes and ears on the ground, their presence a silent reassurance. But remember, discretion is paramount. We cannot afford to let this prophecy become a source of panic. We must understand the truth before we act upon it. Elara turned to Gregor, a sense of purpose solidifying her resolve. General, I will require individuals who are adept at observation, who can blend into any environment, and who possess an unwavering sense of duty. I will present you with specific criteria, but I trust your judgment in selecting the most suitable candidates. Gregor inclined his head. You shall have them, advisor. Men who understand that the greatest victories are often won through silence and subtle maneuverings, not through brute force. Theron watched them, a measure of comfort settling over him. These were his most trusted confidants, the pillars of his reign. If anyone could navigate this perilous path, it was them. The individuals we seek, Theron continued, his gaze returning to the parchment, may exhibit their abilities in subtle ways. Perhaps an uncanny intuition, an unusual resilience, or an inexplicable connection to nature. It could be a child who seems to understand the whispers of the wind, or one who can soothe the most savage beast with a mere touch. It could be someone who, despite their young age, displays a wisdom far beyond their years, or a peculiar talent that defies logical explanation. We must be open to all possibilities, however improbable they may seem. He paused, his voice deepening with the gravity of his command. However, if any such individual is found to possess abilities that clearly demonstrate a potential for great harm, an inclination towards darkness, or a disregard for the well-being of others, then swift and decisive action must be taken. But this is a last resort, Elara. Our first priority is understanding. We must not condemn a child based on fear or prophecy alone. We must witness their deeds, understand their intentions. Elara nodded, her eyes conveying her unwavering commitment. I understand, Your Majesty. We will approach this with the utmost diligence and a commitment to fairness. We will seek not to judge, but to comprehend. And should the need arise, we will act with the protection of Ethelgard as our guiding principle. And what of those who might seek to exploit this prophecy? Theron mused, his gaze distant, as if peering into the shadows of the future. Are there not always those who would twist such power for their own gain? Whispers of such individuals have reached my ears, factions operating in the fringes, hungry for any advantage. The potential for manipulation is indeed a significant concern, Your Majesty. Elara acknowledged. We must remain vigilant not only for the prophesied child but also for those who might seek to influence or control them. My team will also be tasked with discreetly monitoring any individuals or groups who display an undue interest in ancient lore, or who seem to be gathering information about unusual occurrences within the kingdom. Gregor interjected, his voice low and steady. We will also increase patrols in border regions and areas known for their unsavory elements. Any unusual activity, any suspicious gatherings, will be reported immediately. We will cast a wider net, Your Majesty, to ensure no one slips through our grasp who might seek to exploit this situation. Theron inclined his head, a flicker of approval in his eyes. Good. We must be prepared for all eventualities. This prophecy is a seed of potential, and like any seed, it can grow into something beautiful and life-giving, or something twisted and destructive. Our task is to ensure it blossoms into the former, and to prune away any tendrils that threaten to corrupt it. He looked at Elara, his gaze filled with a profound sense of reliance. You have my full authority, Elara. Spare no expense, no effort in this endeavor. My kingdom's future may well depend on it. But remember, the lives and livelihoods of our people are paramount. We act in their name, and we must do so without causing them undue fear or distress. Let your actions be as silent as the stars, and your discernment as sharp as a honed blade. Elara met his gaze, her own filled with a quiet determination. I will not fail you, Your Majesty. Ethelgard will be protected. As Elara and Gregor departed, leaving Theron alone once more with the weighty silence of his study, a profound sense of isolation washed over him. The burden of the crown was heavier than ever, yet in the capable hands of his advisers, a sliver of hope had been kindled. He had set in motion a delicate dance, a search for a destiny that could either save his kingdom or doom it. The fate of Ethelgard now rested on a whispered prophecy, a child yet unknown, and the unwavering loyalty of those he had entrusted with this most crucial of tasks. The night was long, and the shadows of uncertainty stretched long before him, but for the first time since deciphering the prophecy, King Theron felt a flicker of agency, a sense that he was not merely a passive observer of fate, but an active participant in shaping the future. He would safeguard his kingdom, whatever the cost. He would uncover the truth, no matter how deeply it was buried. And he would do it with the quiet strength and unwavering resolve befitting a king.